It is Chris Landry of LandryFootball.com, and we are going to talk about the Vols. And it's all brought to you by Owl's Nest Barbecue. I'll tell you more about them and Steve Ray's Midnight Oil that recently did some work for me. But Chris, let's start with the Tennessee Georgia game, and a game that slipped away from Tennessee pretty quickly. And I think a lot of people thought that Tennessee had a chance for the upset, but in the end, when I look at that game, it just looks like a program that's on another level than Tennessee right now. That could change, but right now, as of 2022, Georgia just looks more talented top to bottom.
Well, they're definitely more talented, and I think that's a very fair point. I also think that the matchup is not as good for Tennessee. Um, so much about who are better teams, and I think there are some elite teams that have maybe overall best talent, but it's really about styles make fights, and some people match up better with others, and some people don't. And when you have contrasting styles, it is more a matter of not who's better as much as who can impose their will on another team to get their style to which is clearly advantageous to their team and disadvantageous to their opponent and vice versa. So I think it's overall Georgia is better. I think Georgia is the right now and has been, I think, last year and this year, the best program in the SEC. And I know that's difficult because it's, well, wait a minute, Alabama has been the best program over a longer period, but I do think that Georgia looks more like Alabama than Alabama does, or Alabama used to. And I think Georgia's more complete. Very good on special teams, very good on offensive, running the football, throwing the football, very good on defense against the run. They can get to the quarterback, and people talk about their numbers are not what they get. A lot of pressures and they get a lot of base pressures, but they also can blitz, as we saw this past week, and they can cover very well. So they've got, as I like to say, a lot of tools in their toolbox that allows them to do different things. And that's what makes, to me, at the highest level, the best teams, because if one aspect of your team is not as effective against this opponent, you can reach for the other tool that can be as effective, or the other. Whereas if you're more of a one tool type of team, that tool's gotta work everything you got and fix every problem, and sometimes you just can't do that. And I think that I think that's another factor in this matchup that wasn't all that effective. And I do think that playing on the road was a big challenge. I think it did have an effect in the game, but I think the biggest effect, people said the crowd noise affected all the false starts. And I think it had an effect. But I think the biggest effect, Dave, was they couldn't block Georgia. So what happens is when you are struggling to block a front, you're trying to get just a, I don't want to say cheat, it's not illegal. You're trying to get a head start. You're trying to anticipate the snap count. You try to move, so because you know that they are beating you consistently off the snap. So you're trying to beat them to the punch. And if you're a little too quick, you get called for it, and 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 you get called for it. And that's, to me, what's happening. And the other thing I think was interesting is that Tennessee didn't really have anything in their mix offensively. They were still trying. Did you notice they were still trying to use the hand clap as a signal? I don't understand that at all. Doesn't make any sense at all. You've got to have the hand signal. And you're not hearing the tackle's not hearing the clap and that noise. So some of the things I don't think they did all that well, but no doubt they were beaten by a better team that if they lined up and played 10 times, they'd probably lose to this same Georgia team, would probably beat this Tennessee team probably 8 times out of 10.
That's fair. I think things got away from them, and I think Tennessee going in thought that the crowd noise they would be able to quell by their tempo, and they have done that before, but this was different. And there was a local talk show host who played football for Tennessee who kind of stirred that up, that Sanford Stadium wasn't a difficult place to play. And then you had Stetson Bennett's phone number go out. It just seemed like Tennessee, as a fan base and as a team, maybe got a little over their skis. Now, they'll face Missouri, and Tennessee, according to the college football prognostication index or whatever they call it at ESPN, had a 63% chance of making the college football playoff before Saturday. Now still has a 63% chance because of the upsets that happen with Clemson and Alabama. But when I look at this team, they better be sure that they're ready to go against Missouri, because Missouri's not a bad defensive team. Let's start on that side of the ball. They're not a bad defensive team at all.
No, they're not. And I think the reality is, I don't think they can stop Tennessee. But again, if Tennessee's sloppy, if Tennessee's kind of still licking their wounds from last week, and they're not doing a very good job, and we saw what again, Missouri though, in Georgia, those styles are a little different. I would expect that Tennessee would be able to get, if Tennessee is Tennessee, they're going to be able to get off to their explosive start. And then this Missouri offense that simply cannot keep up with Tennessee is not going to have a chance. But yeah, to your point, if Tennessee's just not ready to play, and they're kind of thinking that, well, we lost the game and I think you got to play. I think you got to come out and be yourself. I think only Tennessee can beat themselves really in the next 3 games, but I've seen it happen before. It absolutely has happened before.
And then as far as defensively, I thought the one player against Georgia that if we were calling out his name at the end of the game, that Tennessee would have won was Byron Young. If he were the MVP of that game, I think Tennessee would have won that game, because that means they were doing things defensively. But that leads me to Tennessee's defense and their matchup against Missouri. I don't see any reason, even though the Vols didn't play great on defense against Georgia, that they can't play much, much better against the Tigers this week. Your thoughts?
Yeah, listen, I agree. I don't think this Missouri offense hasn't been good all year long.
Yeah.
They just don't have any real answers, and I think they've gotten a little bit better quarterback play. I mean, they played well against South Carolina and got better play there. And listen, you still can throw the football at Tennessee if you're patient enough, but can you block their front? I don't think they can, but I think they'll come up with a good plan. I think they'll play hard. They'll play pretty well. I just don't. I think this game is all about Tennessee, in that it's really what Tennessee does. I don't think Missouri can do anything to make this game close, other than take advantage of Tennessee mistakes, which hasn't been the case in most situations this year. It was the case when, for example, Missouri played Georgia. But again, Georgia's going to play games closer to the vest, because they dominate teams, but they dominate up front. They wear you down. It's just like their win against Tennessee. It was a lot bigger, I thought, than 27-13. I mean, it looked like, again, a 34-6 game. But that's what it felt like. That's what the film looked like. But that's not what they do. When they dominate you and wear you down, whereas Tennessee, just scores a bunch of points. And so I think this is going to be a tough matchup for Missouri, unless, again, Tennessee's just not ready to play, which I don't really see that happening, Dave.
I thought last year, even though they lost a game, I thought Georgia was an elite team. I think there have been times, LSU, I thought that was an elite team. But
In 19, yeah.
Yeah, 19. They could have lost a game. I thought Alabama has been elite teams. So I I know this is a weird way of asking this, because ultimately you're not elite until you win a championship. So I'm getting ahead of myself. I just don't feel like, even Georgia included, and what I saw Saturday, I don't feel like there's an elite team that if they show up and play above average, they don't play to their best, that they can beat anybody in the nation. Am I wrong to say that so far that doesn't feel like one team has separated itself from the pack?
Yeah, I don't think any team in college football is elite this year. If you want to use the category, I mean, you have to define what elite is. So let's use last year, and this is an example. I thought Georgia was better last year. Now, I will say I think Georgia is better offensively this year,
Agreed.
but I think they were a better team last year overall. But they lost the game. They lost the SEC championship game. And if you look at how they lost that game, in my view anyway, is they were dominant so often last year that their defensive line rotation didn't play as many snaps. I mean, they played a lot of young guys, which people like, and that's good. But when they had to play those guys for all those snaps against Alabama and chase Alabama, they couldn't get it done in the conference championship game. So they spent all that time getting ready for the playoff game, conditioning, and and they flipped it around. And we all know Alabama didn't have the receivers. Whatever, you got to play with who you play. And maybe it'd have been different. Don't know. I thought Georgia was the best team in the country last year, and I thought they were at times elite. This year, I don't see them as elite, but I will say this: they're more complete this year. They may not be as dominant as they were defensively last year. Still pretty doggone good. Jalen Carter is as good as anybody. They're still going to have multiple guys drafted in the first round again this year. They can cover. They're good up front to defend the run. They can bring good four-man pressure, which is not going to lead to as many sacks. But when they blitz, and they don't blitz a lot. Georgia used a lot of simulated pressure. They'll show blitz and back off. They did some of that against Tennessee, but they brought a lot of that pressure. Those are things, they're very multiple defensively, they're good, and offensively, they're better. So I don't know if that means that they're elite or not. I don't know that it matters because, are they going to be the best team in the country this year? I think they're the most complete team. I have not seen Ohio State play their best game yet. Their best game is going to be intriguing and maybe somewhat like Alabama, meaning like Alabama of last year offensively, not Alabama this year. Michigan's the opposite. They'd be, power. I don't think. Yeah, I think that Georgia's the most complete team. If you said, Chris, you gotta pick a favorite to win it all this year, I would pick Georgia because they're more complete and more likely. But I don't know who they're going to play. I mean, if they make it, who they're going to play. I don't know about injuries. So those things I usually tend to table, but they're really complete. Michigan's not as explosive on offense. Ohio State's not as good on defense. TCU's not as good on defense. So I think there are a number of teams that fall short of Georgia's completeness, but I think we'll see at the end of the year. We might both say, you know what, they're a little closer to elite than we think right now. But you're right, you got to finish it out. Just like with Tennessee, I was always reluctant to pump the brakes on the comparison to the 2019 LSU. You start doing that stuff, everybody does it, but it's like you've beaten one really outstanding team in Alabama. You're going to have to beat Georgia, which didn't happen, we know. You're going to have to win the conference title. Then you're going to have to win 2 games in the playoffs. You got to do 4 times coming up, every bit as much as you did in the one game, and you got to do it 4 more times. You're 20% of the way, and you want to compare them. No, I don't. Stats don't really tell you the story, and I think we know. And I didn't feel like this Tennessee team was anywhere really near the 2019 LSU team, and I think that kind of has panned out at least in one game, and we'll see where it goes from here.
Owl's Nest Barbecue is your home there in Ottawa for, the best barbecue supplies you could ever imagine. They got the rubs, the sauces, they've got it all. Owl's Nest Barbecue also has the Green Mountain Grill. And if you need your car serviced, my son just calls and says, hey, do I take it to Steve Ray? Yes, you do. Steve Ray's Midnight Oil, a proud Michelin distributor. He is Chris Landry. I'm Dave Hooker. This has been a presentation of Off the Hook Sports.